So my name's Neil Curtis. I work in the Home Office Economic Crime Directorate, and I'm our AI strategy lead, thinking about the threats and opportunities across fraud, money laundering, and asset recovery, and pass on down the line.
Hi folks, my name's Stubbs. I work at OpenAI and I lead our investigations, detection and prevention of scams and fraud.
Hello, my name's Aaron. I'm the CEO of ScamAdviser. We basically help consumers detect scam websites, with scam web shops, et cetera, et cetera.
Hello everyone, I'm Yogesh Patel. I'm the CTO and a Chief Data Scientist at Outseer.
Hi, my name's Gabriel. I work at Visa. I spent the last 20 years working in fraud and financial crime like yourself, Neil. And I'm looking at the moment at how we can help on the acceptance side to helping merchants and acquirers with problems like this.
Great stuff. So now you know who we are, but do we all know what Agentic AI is? Well, who better to ask on the panel than Jack?
Yeah, and turns out this is actually a pretty important question because at drinks last night I heard about 10 different definitions, including from people that worked at AI companies, so that's a great start. Where we are at OpenAI, our kind of understanding and definition of this paradigm shift we're going through is like, at the moment, the AI tools we're using are very much a kind of informational capacity. So when you ask ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini something, it's like in a room somewhere there's this really smart, sometimes misguided, but smart person who can send you kind of like text outputs or audio outputs that provide information. So it can kind of tell you about something that's happening or give you advice or maybe draft an email for you. But we're now moving to a state in agentic AI where that person, this imaginary person, also has a computer and they can take action on your behalf. And probably one of the best examples of this is, at the moment you could ask ChatGPT to research a meeting for you, compile a guest list and send you a copy of the email that you then copy and paste and send. But we're increasingly moving to a space where ChatGPT will also book the meeting venue, organize the catering, book the taxis, send the calendar invites. So yeah, imagine that your AI of the future, is like a human with a computer and they can take action. And the capability is here, like this already exists, but the truth is it's not very widely kind of spread out at the moment. The capability is not very accessible. And actually, an interesting question. Put your hand up, I guess, if you regularly use ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. Yeah. And then put your hand up if you regularly use Codex or Claude Code or Anti-Gravity. There you go. This time next year, I guarantee all of you will be putting your hand up for the second question. So that's the space we're heading into. Obviously, it has huge implications in terms of how it's misused and abused by criminal actors, but also I think we're going to talk about how folks like us could be using this to do our jobs better as well.
So it's a powerful tool. And Gabe, from the Visa view, how do you expect to see kind of your customers, the public, kind of using Agentic AI more and more in their lives?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. I think as soon as you see things like Claude, you realize just how powerful this stuff is. I'm not sure that consumers really quite know how to sort of get to that, but what I think is happening at the moment is that we are really in a new wave of commerce in terms of, what am I going to do? I'm shopping for something, what am I going to do? And so I don't think the consumer necessarily understands, Jack's discrepancy between what is what and what is the other. And so what we see is a lot of people looking for advice on shopping, using tools which they think of as doing this for them. And the next step is, will the agent complete the purchase? And so that's really a massive change from the way that it's happened so far. And that means that there's a whole host of challenges for consumers to understand what's real and what's not real, but also for merchants and how they do this. But I think intuitively we all know that if we can use tools like this to get a better deal, we're going to do it. And so it does provide a huge opportunity for people to find better commerce, ultimately.
So Aaron, just turning to you now, how does that agentic commerce approach create new threats that we have maybe never seen before?
Right. So there are definitely new attack vectors that we're thinking about here. And just to build on to Gabriel's point of whether or not the general public understands about this or not, they don't need to, actually. I think probably for even next year, as Jack is saying, I think most of them probably won't be aware that they're using agentic AI. But however, once there are enough companies or enough products or mediums that encourage them and push them to use this, it will happen eventually. Think about, like, for instance, I keep on bringing up Google I/O. That just happened a few weeks ago. If you look at what they were trying to say there, it was essentially the entire shift from, oh, you're making the search, you're making decisions, and et cetera, you're going to a website to purchase it. Now it's like this entire flow will be done for you, right? And when someone like Google, when the Apples, when the Microsofts of the world build this directly into their products, consumers are going to be using this regardless of if they understand it or not. And so that's where we want to frame this question, like where do we see this new threat here? So we are all attending GASA here. We're all trying to find different ways to protect consumers, to protect people from being scammed. And we haven't really even solved this question yet. But now we're seeing the new threat vector, which is it's not people that's going to get scammed, it's the agents that are going to get scammed. And that represents a fundamental shift in how you build these anti-scam or scam prevention products, because now you no longer need to think about the emotional aspects of things. You don't need to think about, oh, maybe doing some education or doing some prevention, and how do you fit the human mind into this and then human behavior into this. Now you're looking at a machine. How do you write all of our knowledge, all of the scam intelligence that we have, and translate it into something that is machine readable, that they can look at, that they know they should utilize, and of course, even more importantly, because with the regulations surrounding usage of AI and whatnot, it has to be deterministic, right? It has to be repeatable. You need to have something where they can say every single time, this is how I arrived at my decision here, and this is how I made this decision to purchase something or buy something, and so on and so forth.
And so that's the threat within agentic commerce. But more broadly, as we all come to use these tools and as we rely increasingly on them and trust in them more to do more things for us, how do we think that's going to change the criminals' approach to how they plan and execute fraud and money laundering as well? So, Yogesh, I'm going to turn to you and kind of let me know, how do you think the threat landscape is going to change for banks with the rise of agentic AI?
Yeah, so if I just answer it slightly abstract first of all, the fraudsters don't really care whether it is what tool they're using. Is it agentic AI, predictive AI, is it generative AI? All they care about is the scale of economics. Now, for the last two and a half decades, we've been building fraud systems with fraud as our primary learning mechanism. With agentic AI, it's creating those adversaries that are now learning from our systems, which makes it super difficult for us to kind of think about how we're going to approach the whole landscapes and the evolving threat. Because, like you said, Aaron, right? It's not, we don't have humans on the other side. Now we have agents and we have machine on the other side. Now, over the last, again, two and a half decades, we've done extremely well in kind of building systems and building defense in-depth approach that protects the consumer and the bank. But it always assumed that there is a human on the other side. With agentic AI, not only you have a problem of is there a machine on the other side, but now adversaries can utilize the tools and the techniques behind the agentic frameworks to really scale out their attacks. And I think this is what the fundamental shift that we're going to see, because there is not going to be a silver bullet that says there is one single model or there is a one single data signal or a one single security control that covers agentic and able to distinguish between agentic and humans. And when we advise banks, the way we kind of approach it is that, look, all the investment we made, we're going to have to continue to make those investments when it comes to your detection layer and your prevention layer. Where we see a fundamental shift is in the trust boundaries. How do we still ensure the bank that it is the customer or a delegation of authority to an agent, but it's still a legitimate act or a legitimate transaction? And how do we actually differentiate that? And that's some of the fundamental shift we're seeing.
So it's a big shift in scale. It's a big shift in sophistication as well. So that's extremely challenging, and for us in government and for all of us in different sectors around the room, how do we respond to that? Are we ready? Are we prepared with the systems, the people, the tech, the comms, the education, all of those, the tools that we can put in the public's hands? And I think the scale is quite frightening. We're talking about fraud, but we've talked a lot as well today about asset recovery and the proceeds of crime. And I'm a bit worried about it from a money laundering perspective as well. At the moment, if you want to launder money, you might have to go to a bit of effort to recruit and to obtain bank accounts. But imagine if you could just, through a computer sat in the corner of your room, just spin up as many synthetic identities that look real, and you can move money at pace. Fire them up and kill them off at a rapid pace in ways which is very hard to detect and move. So it feels like a potentially apocalyptic viewpoint, and we're standing on the precipice of that, and that can be quite daunting and quite intimidating. So having GASA bring us all together and be thinking about these challenges and thinking about the next steps is really helpful and really, really important. But is it happening yet? So Jack, can you give us the inside track?
I can try. It's actually fascinating because I think at the last GASA event I went to end of last year, everyone was talking about deepfakes and synthetic audio, and not a single person has yet asked me about You could be the first person, but not a single person today has asked me about deepfakes. But we have been speaking extensively about agentic AI capability. And the truth is, like, we're not yet seeing widespread abuse of agentic capabilities by financially motivated criminals, particularly the scam compounds. And I think that's probably for two reasons. I think the first reason, like I said, is this capability is not actually that widely dispersed yet. You have to have a degree of kind of like curiosity and technical know-how to kind of understand what it is and get access to the tools. That is changing. And the other thing, I think a huge part of the reason we're not seeing widespread adoption and abuse yet is that what they're doing is already working. And we know that these folks are financially motivated. They want to do what works, and they want to do it as quickly and cheaply and easily as possible. And they can currently use the current kind of AI capability in this like informational state very successfully to do that. And yeah, 6 months ago, everyone was asking me about deepfakes, and we're kind of saying to folks like, well, yes, we do see that, but it's a tiny proportion of the kind of abuse in terms of how scammers are actually misusing AI. By far, the single most common use case for scammers is translation. So where they used to use Google Translate, they now use Claude or ChatGPT, and they sit there on Telegram or other encrypted messaging apps, and they copy and paste the message over, and they translate it into their language, and then they have the model help them draft the next reply. And then on top of that, they're doing things like building websites, researching clients, designing ad campaigns. And candidly, one of our big challenges in terms of how we detect and disrupt this stuff is that at first glance, it looks exactly like every small, medium business, every enterprise in the world is doing exactly this kind of work, right? The criminals are not sitting there saying, hey, ChatGPT, I'm a scammer and I want to scam some people. They're saying, like, I've got an amazing product and I want to build an outreach list and write cold outreach approaches on LinkedIn and then convince this person to close the deal with me. So that's the kind of nuance that we're trying to navigate. But lastly, on the agentic thing, I'll say we're not seeing it yet, but we're starting to see some experimentation, and we can kind of get an idea of where it's going. We've seen some of the more kind of, I would call them AI-forward actors, essentially able to automate their top of funnel. And I think where we're heading is that the entire funnel becomes this automated process. And that in itself then, we don't have time to answer these today, but like some really interesting questions about some of the secondary effects. I think it's very notable that to date we haven't actually seen any new types of scam due to AI. We've seen them do the same scams at a level of efficiency that wasn't possible. But maybe with, when the AI agents are conducting the scams, we actually do start to see some new scams because the AI finds things that we as human scammers didn't notice before. Or like Aaron was saying, the threat surface actually becomes other people's agents. And then the other question we talk about a lot, but is there still a market for human trafficked slave labor in Southeast Asia when actually you can have an unlimited number of AI agents doing all this work for you? I'm not sure there is. So all the stuff we've been talking about today, in 12 months' time, it could look incredibly different.
I'm not sure if that means every cloud has a silver lining or every silver lining has a cloud. I'm not sure, but there may be other consequences of this that we haven't yet thought about and that actually may reduce human trafficking. So that's good news. I think it's good news as well that we're not seeing large-scale, whole-scale adoption of agentic AI just yet. But I think it's sobering to know that it's coming down the road, and it's probably going to come quite fast. That's the one thing that we know about AI, is that the pace at which it comes is quicker than we ever expected. So, but the good news is we have a bit of time to prepare. a bit of time to get our game in order to really address the threats. So let's move away from the apocalyptic view and think about some of the opportunities that we might have. And I certainly read regular articles where we see the private sector adopting agentic AI to try and improve their systems and their processes. So let's start thinking about how we can start applying some of this stuff and what we can do in response. So I'm going to turn to Yogesh. Let's take an industry view, kind of how will agentic AI help the kind of financial institutions? And importantly, what can other industries learn from that?
Yes, it's again an interesting question, because when most of people, when they think about agentic AI, and especially in the fraud domain space, they tend to think about automation. But the way I like to think about it is that it's more than just automation, right? It's giving or augmenting that expertise that banks have spent quite a lot of time building it, that fraud expertise, that human in a loop, and that's not going away anytime soon. And can we then just amplify it so that we can actually match the speed of the attackers? Because some of the discussions that we've been having, it's that we are going to see an increase in the scale of emotional attack surface and the attackers just really going after that. So right now, when we think about scams, job scams, romance scams, it takes a bit of time for fraudsters to get going. Now imagine with the help of agentic AI, it just lets all your agents do all the work, right? And that's what we need to do on the bank side, just to really give that human in a loop, that superpower to say, trying to match the speed, and if not, do one better. When you actually think about some of those use cases that we can apply, we know today that when there is a model drift or when there's a data drift, there's a huge amount of alerts that gets generated. And then it becomes a chicken and an egg situation, because you're trying to catch up with your alerts, trying to close them down, but your model starts drifting, you start to see more false positives. So again, here I can see a use where agents are really just learning about how the fraud operators are closing the alerts and really going after just closing those false positives as quickly as they can. When we think about fraud strategies, when they write policies and their rules, again, we know today that to compensate for that model drift, most of those fraud strategy guys are writing quite a lot of rules, and it's just increasing amount of rules getting written on a fraud systems that's putting a huge pressure on that. Here, again, an agent can come in and just say, you got so many repeated rules that you're writing, here's a compressed set of rules, and have another agent that says, I'm going to compress the compressed rule sets that I've got, I'm going to convert that into a model, and that goes straight into your modeling environment and straight into the machine learning platform, and then you see a better score from a fraud detection standpoint. So where I think it's going to be super useful for the banks in a fraud domain is having all these different agents coming together. One's looking at the data drift, one's looking at the policy drift, one's looking at closing the alerts as quickly as we can, one's looking at the adaptive nature in terms of just talking to the customers, but in a super adaptive, contextual-driven manner, not the static, yes, decision tree that the fraud operators have today. And then what the rest of the industries can learn from this, just to answer your question, Neil, is that we know today some of those mechanics and everything else that we have out there, it works. It's out there, it works. Automation's got a role to play, agentic's going to help, but when you start to combine then with the regulators, when you then start to combine that with the telco operators and each of these guys having their agents, I think we can create a defense in-depth approach that can tackle scam at pace.
So we can supercharge our own response, and that's good news. That's the key message to take away probably today, that the opportunities are there. We need to be rapid, we need to be agile in how we adopt them and how quickly we can integrate those into our systems and into our processes. But Jack, what about the public? I'm a member of the public. How can I use agentic AI to better protect myself from fraud?
I mean, I think to a degree, as Aaron and others have said, I think this kind of distinction between agentic or not agentic starts, to the consumer, it kind of starts to not matter. It's just that ChatGPT or Gemini will just get better, and it will just be able to do things for you in a way. But completely, agree so much that the idea that we would just sit here and let this happen and not use the same capabilities ourselves to do our work better is ridiculous. It'd be like if we hamstrung ourselves by saying we're not going to use computers because computers are also used in scams. And I think we will increasingly head to a place in terms of prevention and keeping people safe, like I was talking about earlier, where we are currently in this kind of informational state, and we'll move to something that's more orientated around action. And the best example of this that I have is that at the moment, ChatGPT is actually incredibly good at spotting scams. Tens of millions of times a week, we see people getting strange SMS messages, weird emails, looking at strange websites, and they take a screenshot or they copy and paste it, they put it into chat, and they say like, yo, is this legit? Does it look safe? Is this a scam? And we've done some testing, and chat's incredibly good at detecting scam indicators and basically walking people through this kind of structured risk assessment. And off the back of that, we partnered with GASA to launch scam.org as a kind of consumer-facing capability for everyone to do this. And my favorite example of this was a story I was told by a woman at the UN Fraud Summit in March who was telling me about a family friend with a teenage boy who was talking to a girl that he met on Instagram, was asking chat basically for help, kind of, improving his flirty and slightly suggestive messages that he wanted to send to this girl on Instagram. And he was sharing screenshots of the messages he got back, and chat proactively said to him, based on what you shared with me, I don't think this is a real person. I think this is probably a scam. You should go talk to your parents. Amazing, like proactive intervention by the model to basically probably save a teenage boy from this extortion scam. But then the next step in terms of if this was an agentic model is not just providing the information, but also starting to take some action. So the user could say like, yes, actually, notify Meta about this. Meta can then use it to launch their own investigation. Draft me something that I can send to law enforcement. Send a message to all of the parents of my friends, right? Because we know that these actors deliberately target friend groups of teenagers. So again, moving from like, here's the information to act versus like, here's actually the ability to act.
Fantastic. And Gabe, can I ask you, looking at the visa space, what other ways do you think agentic AI can help protect the public? How are you adopting it?
Yeah, it's definitely the case that we need to fight fire with fire. So one of the threats here is that a sophisticated fraudster really in their bedroom now can go and build something that looks like a totally realistic website and go and con people into doing transactions on that website. And so what we're looking at is, can we use AI to get inside that, to work out that these websites have been generated and close them down and to really act on that. I do think we need to take a step back as well, though, right? So for all of the people here thinking about how to stop fraud, there's probably 20 times as many people out there thinking, how can we get more agentic commerce? So we're going to be going through this wave here. As a network, we're looking at how can we make that agentic commerce safe for all the participants as we go forwards.
And just thinking more broadly about that, there's so many other areas in government that we need to be thinking about as well here, about how we use agentic AI. Whether that's kind of, there were folks here doing chatbots to engage with fraudsters and disrupt, secure kind of the information, bank account details, phone numbers, loads of disruption opportunities that we can scale up and we can automate far more. We can be looking a lot more at how we use OSINT capabilities to identify harmful content online. How do we investigate those in ways that remove some of the burden on investigators and then take down content at scale, because it's spinning up incredibly quickly. So, but let's just also just turn back to the agentic commerce piece just quickly before we wrap up. And Aaron, kind of how can we help protect against that within your space?
So funny about that is, and just to going back to Jack's point here, we use, there's many different consumer-facing apps or websites, tools, have you not. And I think a lot of them are now launching capabilities where, hey, you can post a screenshot, you can post your conversation on here. We'll help you scan it, we'll analyze it, and tell you if it's a scam or not. And in the back end, a lot of them are being powered by GPT, powered by Claude, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we as someone in the space and talking to our under contemporary peers, there's actually a lot more than just simply throwing it to one of the LLMs and then calling it a done job. There's various different rules, various different fine-tunes that nearly all the industry partners here have been doing in order to make sure that when it's being used for an anti-scam detection purpose, like it follows a specific set of rules. And I keep on harping on this, it's deterministic, right? It's not probabilistic. You can't have the exact same input and have a different outcome each time. Especially in the case of fraud and scams, you needed to follow the exact set of rules to get the repeatable answer every single time. And I think that's the key difference here. So from our perspective, like what GPT, what Geminis and the rest are doing, absolutely fantastic. Their models are growing stronger and stronger, smarter and smarter. But ultimately, we believe that there still needs to be a layer, like a guardrail layer or a safety rail layer, if you will, that sits between that and the actual consumers. The consumers, we believe they're not going to go out and search for this solution themselves. It's going to be on us, like whoever we are that is the actual, interaction service between a consumer and the services that they want to access, that's where this guardrail should lie. And that's where we can really do something from the consumer angle to protect it. And of course, going back to Yogesh and Gabriel's point, businesses on their end need to do the same thing as well. So it's a two-pronged approach, both from the consumer side and from the business and service side.
Brilliant. So in every area, whichever area of sector you're from today, Agentic AI is here, it's coming, and it's coming down the road fast. Be thinking about the threat, how it's going to materialize in your space, and be thinking about the opportunities. How best can we use that to maximize our capabilities, our capacity to respond to the threat from fraud? So hopefully we're on the same page. We understand Agentic AI. We will sleep tonight because we understand that we've got opportunities as well as the threats. So thank you ever so much to the panel, and thank you ever so much for your engagement. Thank you.